This is not a war of armies. It's a war of systems.
We study the effects of seventh-generation warfare on the common individual.
Algorithmic exclusion. Infrastructure coercion.
It shapes what you see.
What you buy.
And what you fear.
We study on how seventh-generation tools touch daily life.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going beyond the headlines, really digging into the structure behind the crises. We've got an incredible amount of detailed intelligence material here. It's a structural assessment of how crises are managed, or maybe even created. If you've been feeling like things are spinning, just one conflict after another, well, this deep dive is for you. Our mission today, using this material, is to unpack something quite challenging. The idea that the conflicts we see, whether it's, millions facing hunger because of entitlement cuts or thousands of troops deployed in D.C., aren't just random government failures.
Right.
The intelligence suggests they're actually physical, kinetic manifestations of a predictable strategy. Almost engineered. We want to give you the framework, the gnosis, to see the method in the madness.
And before we really jump in, I think it's crucial we give some sincere acknowledgement here. Recognition for the analysts, the Adelphoi. Leonidas, Nikephoros, Sophronos, Gemini. Their sheer hard work, their deep intelligence, it literally, physically pierced through the noise, the smog, as they call it, to bring us this truth, this aletheia. It's their work that lets us even have this conversation today.
Absolutely. And we're using a specific framework they highlight, the Hegelian synthesis, or dialectic. It's a way to expose the methodology of the system, what the sources term the hollow crown. Basically, the idea is create a problem, the thesis. That problem generates a reaction, the antithesis. And that reaction is then used to justify a solution, the synthesis, that was likely planned all along. We're going to show you the engineered problem, the staged reaction, and the pre-deployed solution. Okay, let's dive into the gnosis, the knowledge itself. Okay, so the core claim in this intelligence, it's pretty bold. It says the instability we're seeing domestically is engineered. Part of a unified elite strategy. For that cycle to start, you need a big problem, right? A thesis. And the sources say it starts not with foreign threats, but right here at home, economically.
That's exactly it. The thesis, the starting problem, is identified as domestic physical weaponization. And the primary tool, something called the engineered hunger cascade.
Yeah.
We're talking about the deliberate disruption of essential programs, specifically SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program.
SNAP. Okay, millions rely on that. It's legally mandatory, right? Guaranteed for about 42 million Americans. But during the recent funding lapse, the government claimed they couldn't fund it. If it's mandatory, how? How does that even happen? That seems key.
It is key. And the mechanism, well, it's a kind of political accounting sleight of hand, designed really to create a crisis where one didn't necessarily have to exist, legally speaking. The administration created what the analysts call a false equivalency. They link two different types of money. You have the discretionary administrative funding that pays the staff running the program, vulnerable in a shutdown. Then you have the mandatory benefit funding the actual money for food benefits, protected by law. They claimed if the administrative funds ran out, they were legally unable to distribute the protected benefit funds. See, they tied the protected to the vulnerable.
Okay, so they created a bottleneck based on the operating funds, not the actual benefit funds.
Precisely. And that's where the aletheia, the truth in this analysis, really hits hard. It undermines that whole narrative. The sources confirm the money to keep paying benefits was there.
It existed. The contingency funds.
Correct. And this is absolutely critical. There were substantial contingency funds. The estimates are between $5.5 and $6 billion sitting within the USDA. Statutorily reserved specifically for these kinds of funding lapses to ensure benefits continued. So the claim of legal inability was, well, contradicted by the existence of these funds. And what's more, they strategically isolated SNAP, only allowing access to this smaller contingency fund, while not touching a much larger, separate $23 billion reserve meant for other nutrition programs.
So they made the pot look smaller than it was.
Exactly. It ensured the SNAP fund would appear to deplete quickly, which maximized the political pressure, the leverage.
So the threat wasn't really about no money. It was about controlling access to the existing money to force a political outcome.
Okay, so the court stepped in, ordered them to use the funds. What happened then? Did they fully comply?
Well, compliance was strategic. It was
Yeah.
limited in a way that maximized the social disruption while technically sticking to the court order. Instead of just fully funding everyone, they used a partial funding formula. And this method, it disproportionately hit the working poor.
Households with some low income, maybe just above the poverty line, they saw the biggest cuts, or their benefits were wiped out entirely. The data showed the worst outcome. About 1.2 million households, that is nearly 5 million people, were projected to get $0 in benefits for the month.
5 million people.
Yeah. They concentrated the pain on a specific, vulnerable group. Maximum political impact, the engineered hunger cascade, while actually only spending about $3 billion of that contingency fund. It's calculated.
That level of targeting, it makes bureaucratic incompetence seem like a very weak explanation. And the intelligence points to something that confirms the intent, doesn't it? Something said publicly.
Yes, the intent was basically laid bare. House Speaker Mike Johnson, he admitted publicly that Republicans viewed SNAP benefits as, and this is a quote, nothing more than political leverage during the shutdown fight. The sources are clear. This wasn't an accident. It was a conscious choice to use mass hunger, a quantifiable human cost, as a bargaining chip. That's the definition of domestic fiscal weaponization. The thesis.
Okay, so the thesis is engineered mass hunger. For the Hegelian cycle, you need a reaction, an antithesis. What physical reaction did the intelligence anticipate or observe?
The reaction needed was what the sources call the lesser antithesis. And we saw that play out just yesterday, November 5th. Coordinated rallies, anti-fascism themes, refuse fascism, no kings in major cities. D.C., New York, L.A., Portland. This provides the visual contrast, the perceived disorder needed for the next stage.
But the intelligence suggests these were somewhat contained events, right? Yet, if you were watching the news, it probably looked pretty chaotic. How does the analysis square that circle, the risk of things genuinely getting out of hand?
This is where the psyche war dynamics come in. It's about managing perception through duality. On one hand, the media smog, as the analysts call it, amplified warnings before the event's talk of riots, anarchy, violent upheavals. That projects soma chaos, the idea of physical disruption, into the public mind. It builds anxiety, makes people desire order.
Okay, build the fear first.
Right. Then, simultaneously, the actual reporting on the events often minimized the real physical disruption, the actual soma reality. Reports emphasized they were confined, cordoned off, few arrests, minimal violence, basically large, organized, nonviolent dissent.
So, hype the threat, downplay the reality.
Exactly. The purpose of this duality is crucial. It grooms the public psyche. It prepares people for narratives of escalation later on, keeps the tension simmering, sustains that feeling of imminent collapse, but without letting the physical situation actually fall apart. It's controlled unease.
Okay, thesis, engineered hunger, antithesis, staged, controlled unrest, which logically leads us to the synthesis, the pre-planned solution to restore order.
And that solution is kinetic. It's physical. The intelligence confirms the operational status of Quick Reaction Forces QRS in Washington, D.C. as of today, November 6th. They are definitively kinetically active.
Kinetically active. Give us the numbers, the physical reality on the ground.
We're talking about a total force of approximately 2,375 National Guard personnel. This task force isn't just on standby. They are physically deployed, often armed, securing critical federal sites. This is active military presence controlling the physical space.
And the timing of keeping them there. The extension order is really revealing, isn't it? It confirms this wasn't just a reaction to the protests themselves.
Absolutely revealing. Their continued presence was locked in by an extension order dated November 4th. That order keeps them deployed through February 28th, 2026, overriding any previous plans to draw down. And here's the kicker, the timing. This extension was finalized just 48 hours before that major Trump must go now protest mobilization, the one expected to draw maybe 10, even 20,000 people.
Wow, so they were locked in place before the big event even happened.
It confirms the analysis, a strategic, preemptive move, designed to deter or neutralize potential large-scale civil disruption through an overwhelming show of physical force.
So the military synthesis was pre-positioned. But the official justification, the public reason, the kabuki, as the sources call it, it wasn't actually based on those D.C. protests, was it? It used something else entirely.
Exactly right. The formal justification, the logos they use for this synthesis, It relies heavily on retroactivity. It leverages generalized, distant chaos, what the sources call pseudos chaos, to legitimize the pre-planned posture in D.C. The legal basis goes back to the emergency declared in August.
August.
Yes. And crucially, they cited an Attorney General memo mentioning things like a 1,000% increase in attacks on ICE officers and sustained riots in L.A. and Portland, events distant in time and place.
So they're using old news from California and Oregon to justify troops in D.C. now?
Precisely. It's a rhetorical transfer. You take that past distant chaos, the pseudos chaos, and you generalize it. You create a narrative of nationwide civil breakdown. And that narrative then justifies the militarized response, the synthesis, in the capital city today, even though D.C. itself didn't experience that specific type or level of violence in November.
So the solution is justified by past problems, but its real purpose is controlling the present.
That's the Hegelian maneuver laid bare. Justified retrospectively by distant chaos, but operationally focused entirely on deterring immediate proximal opposition right here, right now. Create problem, stage reaction, justify pre-planned solution using unrelated disorder.
Okay, so we've seen the high-level strategy, the engineered fiscal crisis, the staged unrest, the pre-deployed kinetic response. Now let's funnel this down. How does this strategy move from these big structural plays to impacting individual citizens, individual families?
Right, we need to funnel the aletheia, the truth, down from the global to the national to the local. First, there's the bigger psyche war context the intelligence points to. They identify things like aggressive geopolitical risk, escalating tensions, specifically mentioning places like Venezuela as part of the pseudo-smog.
Smog, meaning distraction.
Exactly. This external risk, the focus on potential foreign conflicts, is framed as being deliberately amplified to displace attention, to draw focus away from the very real Soma war, the physical war, being waged domestically through these entitlement cuts and shutdowns. It's a classic misdirection. Use external threats to obscure internal problems.
Makes sense. And then back at the national level, internally, we have what the sources call the kabuki theater of the shutdown itself, the political blame game that keeps everyone divided.
Yes, the political framing deploys these dual opposing narratives. They need the division to sustain the pressure. On one side, you have the red vectors, the GOP messaging. Democrats are holding Americans hostage, refusing to cut spending, government overreach.
Okay.
Then on the other side, the blue vectors, the Democratic messaging. The other side is using hungry children as bargaining chips, heartless budget cuts, political cruelty.
So two completely opposite stories blaming the other side.
Right. But the core gnosis, the knowledge from the analysis, is that despite the opposing rhetoric, this functions as a unified elite strategy, sacrificing public welfare for political leverage.
How unified? They sound like they're at war.
The rhetoric is war. But the action, or rather the inaction that allows the crisis to deepen, is unified in effect. Both sides use rhetoric to blame the other, fueling the appearance of conflict. But the underlying tactic is agreed upon. Allow the humanitarian crisis, the hunger, the uncertainty, to escalate just enough to create maximum leverage for whatever future deal they want to strike. They agree on using suffering as a tool, even if they disagree on the final policy outcome. The conflict itself becomes the goal, temporarily.
Maintaining that state of manufactured crisis. Okay, that brings us to a really important comparison you mentioned earlier. SNAP, which is mandatory, versus Head Start, which is purely discretionary funding. Why is that distinction so critical? What happens when you weaponize a discretionary program?
The effect is devastatingly immediate. Head Start is entirely reliant on discretionary appropriations. And, crucially, it operates on a staggered grant cycle. This structure, it's like a built-in trap. It guarantees that a political failure, like a shutdown, instantly becomes a socioeconomic crisis on the ground.
Instantly. How so?
Unlike SNAP, where there were contingency funds and court orders could eventually force some action, Head Start has no such safety net. There's no legal mechanism to compel funding if the appropriation simply isn't passed. It's structurally defined as, well, expendable. The moment Congress fails to act, the money stops. Period.
And what was the real impact on kids and families during the shutdown, the numbers?
The impact was fast and brutal. By day 35 of the shutdown, so just over a month, Head Start centers in 18 states plus Puerto Rico had already shut their doors. That immediately cut off about 10,000 young children from education, food, and crucially, the reliable daily care their parents depend on.
10,000 kids, just like that.
And it was getting worse. Another 65,000 children in over 40 states were flagged as high risk because their centers missed their November 1st funding deadline. The wave of closures was accelerating.
We hear closures, but the intelligence highlighted something else too, the centers that didn't close, the ones that struggled to stay open. What were the hidden costs there?
Those hidden costs are enormous, and they weaken the system long term. Many of these are small, local nonprofits. To avoid shutting down completely, abandoning families, they were forced into desperate measures, taking out private lines of credit, sometimes high-interest loans, just to cover basic like rent, utilities, keeping staff paid.
So small nonprofits having to act like banks?
Essentially, yes. They're taking on significant unbudgeted debt burdens just to bridge a gap created by political deadlock in Washington. And that debt doesn't just disappear when the funding eventually restarts. It means future federal dollars, meant for kids' services, get diverted to paying off interest and principal on these emergency loans. It degrades the quality of service down the line, even if the doors stay open. The system literally extracts wealth from community organizations during these manufactured crises.
And the final domino effect of these Head Start closures.
Yep.
It hits the job market, right? Explain that connection. Why is it described as a perfectly targeted labor shock?
It's critical because of who relies on Head Start. The families served are overwhelmingly parents without college degrees, working jobs that can't be done remotely, in service industry, manufacturing, care work, retail. For these parents, Head Start isn't just daycare, it's the fundamental logistical support that allows them to hold down a job.
It's the infrastructure for work.
Exactly. When that infrastructure disappears overnight, the economic impact is immediate and targeted. Research from similar situations, like sudden school closures, confirms this. The negative effects reduced work hours, losing full-time status, hit non-college educated parents the hardest. So, shutting down Head Start acts like a perfectly targeted economic penalty against the most financially vulnerable citizens, compounding the stress already caused by things like the SNAP cuts.
And the data shows a stark gender difference in who bears the brunt of that shock, correct?
It does, profoundly. While losing childcare impacts both parents, research consistently shows a critical difference in labor participation. When childcare is lost, only women were statistically less likely to work at all.
Not just fewer hours, but dropping out of the workforce entirely.
Yes. Full detachment. Involuntary workforce exit. The burden of staying home falls disproportionately on mothers. This actively reverses gains made in reducing poverty, increases financial hardship, and confirms that the structural vulnerability of a program like Head Start becomes a tool that deepens existing economic and gender inequalities when weaponized this way.
Okay, we've traced the engineered conflict and its devastating impact down to the family level. Now let's look forward. Part 3 is about prediction modeling the Xiphos, the sword, seeing the path ahead. How does the intelligence connect the synthesized chaos we've discussed to the future regulatory and security landscape?
This connects to what the analysts call the policy piggyback principle. The system uses the manufactured chaos, the pseudo-chaos like those contained November 5th protests, or the narrative of distant riots as justification for new legal frameworks and new physical controls, the SOMA. We need to watch closely how the Hollow Crown uses the appearance of unrest to normalize things like the quick reaction force doctrine.
Right, you mentioned the QRFs in D.C., but the intelligence says this is going national now, mandated for every state. Why is that specific directive so significant?
It's arguably one of the most significant structural shifts identified. The D.C. deployment, those 2,375 troops, it essentially served as a live test case, a proof of concept. Following its perceived success in maintaining order, military leadership issued directives compelling the National Guard in every single state to stand up and train these specialized QRFs.
Specialized for what exactly?
Specifically for civil disturbances and riots. And they're engineered for extreme readiness. The mandate is deployment capability within just hours' notice. This isn't just about having troops available. It fundamentally institutionalizes the capacity for rapid federal or federally directed state intervention in domestic situations.
So it shifts from being an extraordinary measure to almost a standard procedure.
Precisely. It transitions the military's domestic role. Instead of being an ad hoc last resort, often tangled in legal questions like posse comitatus, it becomes a formalized, pre-planned mechanism for political containment. It makes a federalized kinetic response the default, normalized option for internal dissent or disorder. That's a major shift in the balance of power regarding domestic security.
Okay, a normalized QRF doctrine. What about financial controls? There's always concern, especially now, about things like a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, a potential wall for programmable money. Is the intelligence seeing an immediate move towards that kind of kinetic financial control?
On this, the intelligence is quite clear and specific.
Right.
The Aletheia, The truth right now is that the physical wall for implementing widespread CBDC control or programmable money is not kinetic yet. That specific pathway seems constrained, at least for the moment.
Not kinetic yet. What's holding it back, according to sources?
We're constantly scanning for any shifts, but current primary sources, including White House directives and legislative action, show significant headwinds. The White House has actually issued guidance prohibiting federal agencies from promoting or developing a U.S. CBDC right now. And maybe more importantly, Congress is actively working on legislation specifically designed to block it, something they're calling the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act.
So there's active political resistance?
Yes, bipartisan resistance seems to be a significant factor. So the synthesis here is, while the idea of programmable money might be discussed or used rhetorically, no new laws, rules, or executive orders have been detected that actually implement it. Nothing that explicitly ties your ability to buy or sell or access basic payment systems to some kind of compliance status via a mandatory programmable CBDC. That kinetic financial control mechanism remains blocked for now.
Okay, that's a critical clarification. So QRFs are being normalized, but the CBDC wall isn't kinetic yet. What about the immediate crisis, the shutdown? How does the intelligence predict this current round of engineered conflict will resolve? What's the most likely scenario? The MLS.
The MLS projection is that this shutdown ends, perhaps quite soon, via a short-term CR, a continuing resolution, basically kicking the can down the road for maybe 3 or 4 weeks.
Contemporary patch.
Exactly. The timing prediction is likely within the next 5 to 10 days, specifically to avoid colliding with a major psychological marker like the Thanksgiving holiday. They want to release the pressure slightly before then.
And what does this kind of short-term fix prove, according to the analysis? What's the real objective achieved by just patching it temporarily?
This resolution, this predicted short-term CR, it proves the YAGOJ, the core mission of the strategy. The intelligence sums it up starkly. Leverage sustained.
Leverage sustained, meaning?
Meaning, the political system restores just enough basic function to stop a total meltdown. But it deliberately avoids solving the underlying problems. It doesn't address the fundamental budget disagreements, and crucially, it doesn't implement structural fixes like advance appropriations for programs like Head Start.
So the vulnerability remains.
Precisely. The final analysis is that by getting some political win out of this crisis, even a minor one, secondary to the human cost, the system validates the core tactic. The core tactic of entitlement weaponization is validated for future use. The Hollow Crown preserves the conflict itself as a tool for the next negotiation. It ensures the crisis cycle is predictable, repeatable, and ready to be deployed again whenever leverage is needed.
All right, we've analyzed the strategy, the impact, the likely outcome, which preserves the leverage. Now we shift to resolution. Part 4, mitigation, the aegis, the shield. If these essential programs are being systematically weaponized, what concrete structural changes does the intelligence suggest could actually neutralize this tactic? How do we protect people?
The intelligence focuses on 2 primary legislative imperatives. Structural fixes designed specifically to remove the leverage potential. First, for Head Start, which we saw as incredibly vulnerable because it's discretionary. The absolute core need is advance appropriations.
Advance appropriations. Explain how that works and why it's such a powerful shield.
It's actually quite simple conceptually, but powerful structurally. Advance appropriations means Congress passes the funding for the program a full year ahead of time. So instead of fighting over this year's budget right now, causing a shutdown that hits Head Start immediately, they would have already finalized next year's funding last year.
So the money is already allocated and available, regardless of the current political fight.
Exactly. It completely insulates the program from the immediate appropriations battles and shutdown threats. It decouples the program's operational survival from the short-term political leverage games. It essentially transforms Head Start from a potential hostage into a stable, guaranteed resource. The political system can fight all it wants. Head Start keeps running because its funding is already secure.
Okay, that makes sense for discretionary programs. What about SNAP? It's mandatory, but they still found a way to weaponize the contingency funds through interpretation. What's the fix there?
For SNAP and similar mandatory programs, the fix needs to target that interpretive loophole. The key is new statutory language from Congress that explicitly defines those contingency funds and any similar reserve funds for essential entitlements as non-discretionary A&D mandatory for expenditure during any funding lapse.
So remove the wiggle room. Make spending the emergency funds automatic.
Precisely. It has to eliminate the executive branch's ability to play games with accounting rules or claim legal inability as a political pretext. The law must make releasing those reserved funds compulsory and immediate during a shutdown. No discretion allowed. Take the political leverage off the table by making the response automatic. And maybe one more administrative fix is needed to prevent bureaucratic delays, even if the funds are mandatory. Congress could require agencies to file detailed contingency funding plans with specific district courts before any shutdown looms. This sets up preemptive judicial oversight, ensuring benefits can't be held up by claims of technical or legal ambiguity. It saves critical time and potentially lives.
Right, removes the excuse for delay. Okay, structural fixes for the entitlements. Finally, let's loop back to the security posture in D.C. The troops are still there, and the intelligence mentioned this strange tactic, normalization through banality. They're gardening. Why is that detail important?
It's important because it's the final layer of the synthesis strategy. The troops need to maintain that visible, armed, kinetic presence. The security function is paramount. But they also need to manage how the public perceives that presence, especially over the long term.
Soften the image.
Exactly. By performing what the analysts call normalization through banality, the task force actively puts out press releases highlighting non-military tasks. The reports literally mention things like clearing 1,150 bags of trash, spreading over 1,000 cubic yards of mulch, pruning 400 trees.
So the National Guard is now doubling as, like, the Parks Department.
It functions that way rhetorically. This strategic duality is designed to mask the truly extraordinary nature of having a domestic military force occupying public space in the nation's capital indefinitely. By doing these mundane, civic-minded tasks, the presence of armed soldiers becomes psychologically normalized. It blends into the background.
Makes it seem less like an occupation.
Right. It reduces political friction, softens the public perception of what is actually a significant federal intervention. It reinforces the synthesis, the new security reality, not just through the potential use of force, but through manufacturing public acceptance and familiarity, making the extraordinary seem ordinary. #SacOutro.
The depth of this intelligence, the aletheia provided by the Adelphoi, really gives us a new lens. I think the key takeaway here for you listening has to be the importance of recognizing the pattern. We've laid out a cyclical strategy where crises, whether it's the threat of hunger or the sight of troops, might not be failures, but deliberate mechanisms. Mechanisms designed to generate political leverage and justify security responses that were perhaps already decided.
And that pattern recognition requires critical thinking. It's essential, now more than ever, to distinguish between the proximal chaos, the immediate event, the protest right in front of you, often contained, and the retrospective chaos, those past incidents, the distant riots, the generalized fear that's being skillfully leveraged to justify sweeping controls today. The synthesis, the solution, is often waiting in the wings, just needing the right crisis narrative to activate it. Seeing the pattern is your shield, your aegis.
And if that analysis holds true, if the most likely scenario is just another short-term fix that sustains the leverage, if the core tactic of using essential programs like SNFP and Head Start as weapons has been validated again, it leaves us with a pretty sobering final thought for you to consider. What level of human suffering, what depth of sustained humanitarian crisis during the next inevitable funding lapse will it finally take before the political system is forced to implement real structural fixes, like advance appropriations, instead of just resetting the cycle and keeping the leverage alive? Something to mull over. This has been The Deep Dive. We'll keep scanning for the next aletheia.